because one of the things I neglected to say is how do we balance Lucifer and Ahriman in our daily lives? And the way we balance Lucifer is we have to use the Ahrimanic impulses to balance Lucifer, meaning that when we're balancing Lucifer, we look into our own soul with a clinical, objective, cold eye to root out all the blemishes that we find there. So we have to be objectively, calculatedly cold in looking within us into our own souls to balance the Luciferic forces, which of course, well, I'll get into them a little bit later. The Ahriman, to balance Ahriman, we have to take a keen interest in the world around us. Everything that's happening in the mundane world in terms of, you know, the stock market, accounting, politics, whatever people are doing in terms of their day-to-day running around and their activities, we take a keen interest, not because we want to have a approval or disapproval of what that which we are taking a keen interest in, but take a keen interest in it, because Ahriman wants us to become completely apathetic with regard to the outside world, you know, just apathetic, etc., etc. So that's the way we counteract Ahriman. We take a keen interest in mundane, everyday, you know, stuff, whether it's the stock market or the geopolitics or whatever, so that we have we're taking a keen interest in what other human beings are doing. That's how we counteract Ahriman and balance it. Okay, so that was the preliminary to tonight's talk, which is on karma, and of course there's absolutely no possibility whatsoever that I'm going to be able to cover all the threads of karma. It's just not possible. So I have to kind of, you know, I spent the last 2 weeks pretty much studying every day, a couple of hours, 3 hours every day, studying this stuff, preparing for tonight's talk. And I said, well, you know, you got to kind of like whittle it down. I mean, this lecture, for instance, this is one of the books I used, Manifestations of Karma, highly recommended. It's got, let's see, 11 lectures in it, you know, and each of these lectures are lengthy. He took probably 2 hours to give each lecture. So there's no way I'm going to be able to cover this entire book. And then I studied another one called Karma and Reincarnation, Their Significance in Modern Life. That was another book I studied. So I kind of said, okay, well, we're just going to get to at least what I think, my feeling, is what are the essentials to know about karma and reincarnation. Because I'm not presuming to think that anybody here actually believes or disbelieves karma and reincarnation. That's really not what this is about. For me, karma and reincarnation are facts of life, and it's a question of, okay, if you don't believe it, that's up to you. So you can take all this with just a grain of salt that I'm going to give you tonight. But the fact of the matter is that spiritually, it's a spiritual truth, it's a spiritual law, and believing it or not believing it is really neither here nor there. Because sooner or later it's going to become apparent to everybody, and it ought to become apparent to everybody as a conscious impulse in our day-to-day lives, that we take into account the karmic ramifications of what we're about and what we're doing. And this will become clear as I go through this. Now, to set the big picture, karma extends throughout the entire cosmos. In other words, now this is another karmic thing that happens in everybody's life. We have a routine. We go on our day-to-day rounds. Many of us have a routine. We get up at the same time, we have breakfast at the same time, we leave the house at the same time, we go to the bus station at the same time, and we get on the boat and we go to wherever. And we do this very rhythmically and routinely every day, without fail. But it happens on a certain day that for some unaccountable reason, you don't leave the house on time. You're 5 minutes late. And on the walk between your house and the bus station, you pass under a bridge. And when you get to the bridge on this particular morning, what you find it's collapsed. And it suddenly dawns on you that if you had left on time, that bridge would have collapsed right on top of you. And you would have died. But for some inexplicable reason, you didn't live in your usual time, and thus were saved. This is an impulse is coming from the spiritual world for you to avert your death. And it's like buying you another life. It's like, because you would have died. That would have been your karma. But your karma was averted because the spiritual world, particularly one, it could have been two individuals actually, from what I've read of Steiner so far. One of them is, if you are living and your parents have died, your father was the one that reached out and tapped you so that you were looking around for your keys or whatnot, so you wouldn't get off on time. Mm. Or it was Christian Rosenkreuz recruiting you to join his, to become a follower. So essentially Christian Rosenkreuz picks people up in order that he thinks that those particular people, men or women, will be particularly suitable candidates to take up spiritual science in this life. Because Christian Rosenkreuz is an initiate. He was extant in the physical, as a physical being, historical being. Because most people don't even know who Christian Rosenkreuz is. But he lived around, I can't always remember. Well, maybe I can use my iPod to figure it out. Because I love Wikipedia. You know Wikipedia? Oh,
don't bring Ariman into the room. Any worse than he already is.
This is how you balance Ariman. You love what you're dealing with.
You love your iPod. That's the answer.
Love your iPod. Love your computer. Love your car. Because without them, you can't use this stuff. Okay, let's search for Mr. Rosenkreuz. If I can spell it right.
K-R-E-U-T-Z, probably.
K-R-E-U-T-Z.
R-O-S-E-N. That's how it sounds.
Let's see, are there any more? They got Rosencrantz here. I didn't put Rosencrantz. Okay, I'll put a comma in there, and we'll see if we get Christian. See if that comes up. Maybe he's so obscure that they don't even have. No, he can't be that obscure.
Well, Wikipedia knows all.
Because I looked up Pelagius yesterday, and it was right there. And most people don't even know who Pelagius is.
Depends on which obscure person was written about.
Pelagius was he was a heretic and lived around 247 to 320 AD, and he was made a heretic because he said the following statement: since perfection is possible for man. Okay, so let me carry on here.
I have to say that's kind of hard too, because then, you know, it's like maybe you're saying, maybe you think, oh boy, you know, I should get to this place and do this, but it turns out really you shouldn't, because, you know, by not doing it, because you don't really know what's going to happen. I mean,
You do if you follow the consequences logically in your thought life, you do know what's
We'll
going to happen.
read this and maybe I'll have a better sense of it.
Let us take pneumonia, for example. It is a karmic effect which follows when during his life in Kamaloka, the person in question looks back to a character which had within it the tendency towards sexual excess and sensual desires. Oh, very interesting, huh? And a desire to live a sensual life, you know, which can take many forms. Do not, notice he's like in the parenthesis here, he says, do not confuse what is now ascribed to a previous consciousness with what appears in the consciousness in the following incarnation. It does not. Okay? What happens is the impulses go deeper into the body and then come to the surface in the next incarnation.
As the illness.
Indeed, that which a person sees during his life in Kamaloka will so transform itself that forces are imprinted in him by means of which he will overcome pneumonia. For it is exactly in the overcoming of this disease, in the self-healing which is then striven for, that the human individuality acts in opposition to the luciferic powers. Because remember I said the main thing about the luciferic impulses is lust, desires, and passion. And wages a pitched battle against the luciferic powers. So in the gaining of the contracting of pneumonia, you haul out these forces which have been implanted subconsciously or unconsciously in the previous incarnation, which then overcome the pneumonia, which then in turn balances out the consequences of and the desire for a sensual life full of sexual excess. That's what happens. Now, and that's luciferic. Now, macrobiotic. When you look at Lucifer, at least when I look at Lucifer and Ahriman, it's very clear to me that relative to one another, Lucifer is more yin comparative to Ahriman, and Ahriman is more yang comparative to Lucifer. And we say in macrobiotic, at least I do, I say pneumonia is a consequence of excess yin. There you have it. And in the burning off of the excess yin, the pneumonia heals. Now, the opposite condition, and this is very interesting considering what occurred to you not so long ago. Man, what is it here? No, I passed it. Oh, what the hell? Okay, here we go. I think it's here. Now the case is different in the so-called tuberculosis of the lungs. This is so interesting. You just gotta laugh at modern medicine's approach to this whole thing. You see how klutzy it is. I mean, seriously klutzy. When we see the singular phenomenon whereby the self-healing forces become active and the injurious influences which result in which would result in the death of the person who has this particular condition, the injurious influences are surrounded and framed in by a calcareous matter with a tissue